Jai Siya Ram, Namaste. So today I'll be talking on a issue which has attracted a lot of global media attention. But as you can see from my topic, I'll not be dwelling on the media reports or the legal aspects of the politics around it. And I'll strictly talk about Ram Janma Bhoomi in literature, history and archaeology. So to give you some background, we all know that Ramayana is one of the two Hindu epics, the other being the Mahabharata. But I would say that even more than the Mahabharata, Ramayana is actually the epic of Asia. And not only the Hindus, but our sister faiths, Jainism, Sikhism and Buddhism, have also really revered this epic. So in Jainism, we have a Jain version of the epic called the Paumicharyam. Guru Gobind Singh Ji wrote a Rama avatar on the biography of Shri Rama, and he proudly states that Guru Nanak Ji was a descendant of Lava, the son of Bhagwan Ram, and he himself was a descendant through Kush, the other son of Bhagwan Ram. Likewise, in Jainism, many Tirthankars were also said to have been born in Ayodhya, which is where Bhagwan Ram was born. So the epic itself has greatly influenced the many different cultures in Asia. So I have shown some of these things, pictorially. So this is the Kicak dance of Bali, Indonesia, which is around a Ramayana-based theme. This is the Ramakian ballet in Thailand, and I've had the pleasure of watching it myself. Thailand, the current capital is Bangkok. But the older capital was called Ayutthaya, which was further inland, and the Burmese invaded it in the 18th century, and then they moved their capital further south to Bangkok. But when Ayutthaya existed, it was probably the largest city in the mid 18th century. Interestingly, President Obama carries a lucky charm, Hanuman. So this is a picture of actually his hands, and there's a lucky charm of Hanuman. And that dates from the time he spent in his childhood in Indonesia. So there, the Indonesians, although they are predominantly Muslims, they still value their Hindu heritage. So holy sites related to the Ramayana are found all over India, obviously. Nepal, because Sita Ji was a Nepalese princess, and Janakpur, the city, is found in Nepal, and there's a big Janak Bhavan temple there. Even in Pakistan, so my in-laws are from Multan, and there was a stretch of the, I think the Ravi river, which was called Sidnai. So it was said that Lord Rama shot an arrow, and the arrow went really straight, and for that one stretch of 1 mile, the river was like really straight, and nobody could explain why the river course was so straight over that 1 mile. And if you can Google Sidnai, I actually Googled it, and you find that the river track is like really straight in that 1 mile. But anyhow, there are traditions associated with Bhagwan Ram. There's a shrine called Hinglaj Mata in Balochistan, and they say that Bhagwan Ram had visited that shrine. In Bangladesh, near the city of Chittagong, there is a pilgrimage center called Sita Kund, and the belief is that Sita Ji had come there and performed yagyas. And in Sri Lanka, of course, Raman was the king of Sri Lanka, and the island itself is dotted by sites associated with Ramayana. So the Chinmaya mission, Swamiji's had done some research, and they've done a wonderful compilation. You can probably buy it from the local Chinmaya mission, and there's also a CD which gives a lot of pictures and other details about these sites. So in the 1800s, wherever Hindus from northern India migrated, they carried the Ramcharitmanas version with them, and it's been the mainstay of our Hindu religion in many countries like Fiji, or if you go to Trinidad, in Guyana, Suriname. So that brings us to Ayodhya, which is where all this started. So Ayodhya is a city on the river Saryu in the northeastern part of the state of Uttar Pradesh in India. It's celebrated as one of the 7 moksha puris in our tradition. So there is a shloka which a lot of Hindus recite every morning, so we recall the 7 rivers, and then there is a verse we recite, Ayodhya, Mathura, Maya, Kashi, Kanchi, Avantika, Puri, Dwaravati, Chaiva, Saptaita, Mokshadaika. So the verse says that Ayodhya, Mathura, Haridwar, Varanasi, Kanchipuram, Avantika, which is Ujjain, and Dwarka. These are the 7 holy sites which, if you visit them and undergo a pilgrimage there, you attain moksha. So, and then, like I said, Ayodhya is extremely sacred in the Jain and the Buddhist traditions. Also, Bhagwan Buddha is said to have visited Ayodhya at least twice and delivered sermons there, which are recorded in the Buddhist Tripitak. And there are archaeological artifacts going back to a very long time, and we'll touch more on that, which indicate that it was destroyed during the 150th 50 BC, but it was also revived by the Gupta dynasty. So according to some historians, the Gupta period was the golden age of Hinduism, and their initial capital was Ayodhya. Again, it was destroyed in the 11th century. Salar Masood, and the reason I wanted to mention him is because very soon there will be a Bollywood blockbuster on, I don't know if it will be a blockbuster, but there will be a movie called Raja Suhail Dev. He's a local hero in eastern UP, and he is said to have defeated the Salar Masood. And Salar Masood was buried inside a temple in Baharaich, the Balark, and there's again a mosque or a mausoleum there today. So the Sikh gurus also visited Ayodhya because of its holiness, and there are Janam Sakhis and accounts by Sikh scholars of how Guru Nanak Ji offered worship. So their visits are actually marked by Gurudwaras in Ayodhya, and since there weren't any local Sikhs, these Gurudwaras were managed by Hindu Pandits till recently, and now the Akali, the Shri Gurudwara Prabandhak Committee has sent Granthis to manage those mosques. Interestingly, Ayodhya has 5,000 temples. The whole city is full of temples, and it has more temples than Varanasi. But surprisingly, none of these temples actually goes beyond 1700 or 1600 AD, which kind of indicates that the destruction of this city had been very thorough, and literally it's been rebuilt from the ashes. So the point of our interest is the Ram Janma Bhoomi temple, which had had a lot of media attention recently. It's on a high mount in the holy city. That area is called Ram Court, the fortress of Sri Rama. So it's really a prized location in the city. As you start walking towards the Ram Court, it's a very steep climb, and so even logically in a holy city, a spot like that would automatically attract the construction of temples. And a lot of holy cities, in the highest spots, you have temples dedicated. And today, even there's a traditional pilgrimage called the Panchakosi Parikrama, which attracts about 250,000 people every year. And so it's a 15-kilometer circumambulation of the Ayodhya city, and they halt at a few spots and bow their heads. And the old Babri Masjid was one of them. So they would halt at the back of the mound where they could see the back wall of the Babri Masjid and halted their heads. So these living traditions kind of indicated, and the common sense of geography, that this was a spot very hallowed in the Hindu tradition. So the question is, what do the Hindu scriptures actually say about it? So we have 18 Mahapuranas, we have 18 Upapuranas, and we have 18 Apapuranas. The Skanda Purana is kind of a geographical encyclopedia of ancient India. It describes, through the Tirth Kshetra Mahatmas, it describes each and every, not every, a lot of pilgrimage centers in great detail. I forgot to bring the printed version of Skanda Purana I have has 10 volumes, and in one of the volumes is the Vaishnav Khand, in which there is a 10-chaptered Ayodhya Mahatmya, which describes each and every holy place in Ayodhya which should be visited by pilgrims. So one of these shrines mentioned there is the Janam Sthan, and there are many other older versions of Ayodhya Mahatmya available in other scriptures or as independent scriptures going back to 13th century. And then there is a Hindi work called the Avad Vilas by Mahant Lal Das, and they all mention the Janam Sthan located at a spot which coincides with the Babri Masjid. So during the court cases, a lot of the Marxist historians who were opposed to the Hindu side, they claimed that this Ayodhya Mahatmya is a forgery, and it is from just 1700s. So as a counter to that, the Baroda Oriental Research Institute produced a manuscript of the Skanda Puran relevant sections, which were from the 1400s. So, I mean, you can from that judge the really excruciating detail to which the lawsuits were, fought by the two sides. There was even an objection that in the Ayodhya Mahatmya, there's a line saying, Janam Sthanad Vayu Kone Pakistanam tu Kathyate. Literally, it means that to the northwest of the Janam Sthan lies the Sita Ki Rasoi, or the Janam Sthan lies to the southeast of Sita Ki Rasoi. So that Sita Ki Rasoi shrine has existed to the present times. So the historians argued that the Janam Sthan is not exactly to the southeast, but what they forgot was that geographical north and south is different from the magnetic north and south. And in olden times, we used compasses to find the directions. So when you offset it by whatever 17 or 19 degrees, you exactly reach the central dome of the Babri Masjid. So again, it's an example of how excruciatingly, this whole legal process was fought. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is credited with the revival of Krishna Bhakti in the Vrindavan area. And a lot of his contemporaries, his disciples, his senior contemporaries, they were also devotees of Bhagwan Ram. So one of his contemporary was Srila Nityanand, and he had commissioned his disciple Vrindavan Das to write a biography of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in one of the verses of the Chaitanya Bhagavat, he describes what Nityanand felt when he arrived at Ayodhya and saw the Janma Bhoomi. So this is in Bengali, if you can read the Bengali script. And it says that Nityanand Prabhu had tears of sorrow, and he doesn't say anything more about it. Whereas when Nityanand Swami went to the other Tirth Kshetras, and he had joy, and out of sheer ecstasy, he had a totally different emotion. So there were kind of indications that the Ram Janam Sthan, by the time Nityanand Mahaprabhu arrived there, had already been desecrated or it was in ruins. And these are some of the things which are actually not produced in the courts because there's so much scattered evidence. I was actually pointed to this by a Facebook friend. So, I mean, you can see how scattered this evidence is. Now, this is something I found while I was reading the literature of the Udasi Sampradaya, which was founded by Baba Shri Chand. And he was the older son of Guru Nanak Ji, and he was extremely long-lived. And so by tradition, he has actually said to have lived more than 150 years, which sounds very incredible, but the Sikh tradition is very unanimous that he was the older son of Guru Nanak Ji. But since Baba Shri Chand took sannyas, Guru Nanak Ji did not pass on his succession, give his succession to Baba Shri Chand. And the Sikh tradition is very unanimous that Baba Shri Chand met the next 5 gurus also. And Guru Har Gobind Ji, the 6th guru, actually gave one of his sons to Baba Shri Chand to further the sampradaya. And that son came to be called Guru Ditta. And so these names are very celebrated in our tradition. So Baba Shri Chand also wrote a lot of scriptures. One of them is such a telltale passage. And he lists all the dynasties that he had seen in his life or before him. Khiljis, Tughlaqs, Lodhis, Sayyids, Suri, which was Sher Shah Suri, and his son, the Mughals. And he says they all established their rule forcibly. They massacred the people of India, cut the heads and covered the soil of India with their blood. And he actually specifically mentions Krishna Ram and Janamasthan Masjid Sangine. They constructed mosques on the birthplaces of Krishna and Rama, and the Shivling was thrown into a well, which is exactly what our tradition shows. If you go to Varanasi, there's actually a well which was worshipped, and it's called the Gyanvapi Koop, because when the Mughal forces came to destroy the temple, the Panditji took the Shivling and he jumped into the well. And later on, when the Kashi Vishwanath temple was revived and by Ahilyabai Holkar, the Marathas, that Shivling was brought out. So because the Shivling was inside the well, that well came to be known as the well of font of knowledge. And so this is a tradition which he has reflected. This is contemporary description. And he says the murtis have been broken. What will happen tomorrow? So Lord, when will you come and protect the weak? One thing I want to point out is that if some of us have grown up in India, we read our history books, and they project, literally I have a copy of an NCRT medieval India textbook, grade 7 by Romila Thapar, first edition, and her chapter is titled The Magnificent Mughals. It was like a blessing according to them to have had all these foreign rulers come and rule over the Hindus. But all the contemporary accounts show that their rule was very cruel, and they smashed our temples, forcibly converted people. So there's a lot of doctrine and distortion of history that we come across. When the Marathas started gaining power, there is a particular ruler, Savai Jai Singh. So he was right. He became powerful right after Aurangzeb passed away in 1707. And there are many documents from other Rajput rulers and even kings, Hindu kings from South India, saying that they regarded Maharaja Savai Jai Singh as one of the foremost Hindu rulers. And he conducted the Ashwamedh and the Rajasuya Yagyas, which were indicator of the fact that he wanted to be a paramount Hindu ruler. So he purchased several acres of land, including the Janma Bhoomi. And in the city palace collection, if you've been to Jaipur, there's a beautiful city palace there. And there's a collection of documents from his times. And one of them is a map of what he intended to do with the Janma Bhoomi. So you can already see that he had intended to construct a temple with the spires. And this is the Ram Chabutra, where worship was offered in the absence of the temple. And you can see the pilgrims actually doing a circumambulation around the Chabutra. Again, we had very frivolous objections from the anti-temple party. The AMU historian said, well, the trees in this picture don't correspond to the trees today. I don't know which map always has to show the trees in the location, especially if it's a 3-century old map. There are many European travelers who mentioned the Janma Bhoomi. There was this English traveler who came during the reign of Jahangir as a representative of the East India Company. There was a Thomas Herbert, but the most detailed description we find is from the Jesuit Austrian missionary. And he actually went there around the time, right at the time of Ram Navami, and saw the Hindus conducting pilgrimage, and he estimated there were like 500,000 Hindus who had showed up. And he noted that the shrine, the Hindu temple, had been demolished. There was a mosque on it, but Hindus had gained possession of the shrine and they performed their worship there. Now, this is a very standard pattern. If you read the history, and historians like Meenakshi Jain, who just last week got the Padma Shri from the government of India, she has noted how even after our temples were destroyed, Hindus kept going back to them and continued to perform worship under great risk. So Ram Janmabhoomi itself, there are at least 3 destructions which archaeologists found. That the Somnath temple was destroyed 7 times, and finally it was rebuilt in independent India. So likewise the Krishan Janamsthan temple has been destroyed 5 times, but we Hindus never gave up on our ancient sites, and as soon as we felt strong enough, we reclaimed their possession. So then there was a Scottish resistance, but at least these first 3 records are pre-British rule times. So you cannot say that the British followed the divide and rule policy to plant these records. Interestingly, even in Muslim records, you find mention of destruction of Ram Janmabhoomi. So the granddaughter of Aurangzeb wrote 40 sermons. In the 25th sermon, she mentioned the destruction of the Sita Ki Rasoi in the Ram Janmabhoomi temple by her own grandfather. There are other records. There is a seal with by the Qazi of Faizabad, which was the earlier capital of the Nawabs of Awadh. So it's a twin city of Ayodhya. And he records that there is a riot broke between Hindus and Muslims over the mosque built by the Emperor of Delhi. So there are many mosques in Ayodhya which were demolished. There's a Treta Ke Thakur mosque constructed by Aurangzeb at the site where Bhagwan Ram performed his Ashwamedh Yagya. There's a Swargadwar mosque in Ayodhya where Bhagwan Ram entered the Saryu river, and according to tradition he went back to Vaikunt. So there's a mosque on the Hanuman Gadi site So when we are talking about Babri Masjid, we have to keep in mind that this is actually not the only temple where a mosque stood. It's literally the tip of the iceberg. There are many other mosques in Ayodhya itself constructed over demolished temples. Another thing is that in 1986, when the government of India opened the locks, ordered the locks of the Babri Masjid to be opened, till then it was very received common knowledge that Babri Masjid was constructed over a demolished temple. But now the Muslim community started making attempts to hide these records. There were cases where these books were suddenly disappeared from noted libraries. So, people have noticed that suddenly after 1990, these books started disappearing from the libraries of institutions like the Aligarh Muslim University. Or if they were reprinted, those passages related to Janma Bhoomi were wiped out. But, people's hands don't reach everywhere, and some copies from the earlier editions have survived. So, come the British rule, and interestingly, the first dispute after Awadh or Ayodhya came under British rule notes that a group of Sikhs led by Nihangs, they forcibly occupied the Babri Masjid. They stopped the namaz. Their leader took a piece of charcoal and he inscribed Jai Shri Ram all over inside the Babri Masjid, and he started performing puja and havan. So there are two things which come out of it. One is that in the 1800s, the Sikhs and Hindus didn't have that much of a demarcation as you see now. And the second thing is interesting that it's a Sikh group which led the reconquest for some time. So complaints were filed by the local Muslims, and this is one of the documents which actually, if you can read Farsi, because in those times, how far we've come, all the records were in Farsi, a foreign language, and today in India we have the local languages and English. But it clearly records that this Nihang Sikh had forcibly occupied the mosque and he was conducting havans and pujas inside. So when the police evicted him, he didn't go very far. He camped near the Ram Chabutra, and he started adding more and more bricks to the Ram Chabutra, and it just kept expanding. And then again he had to be kicked out of there. But again, it's proof that Hindus, including Sikhs, never gave up on this site. Even the revenue records always mention this site as Janam Sthan. And during the legal dispute, it was found that some revenue records after 1980s were tampered with. People were putting whiteouts. So wherever the Muslims had access, they were putting whiteouts. So they were adding Masjid-e Janam Sthan in lieu of Janam Sthan. So in conclusion, till the 1986, it was very standard and received wisdom that the Babri Masjid was constructed over a demolished temple. Nobody even questioned that. There's a scholar named Hans Becker. This is like a huge book where he has studied all the scriptures, text, documents related to Ayodhya that were accessible to him till 1980s. And he has reached a firm conclusion that there were ancient temples at many sites which were replaced by mosques. However, once the case picked up, this view suddenly became wrong notion. And to the extent that Hans Becker was invited to an international conference, and then he was disinvited for having written something which he wrote as a scholar. There was another interesting case in 1975, actually 75 to 80. Excavations were conducted in trenches around the Babri Masjid, and the preliminary report clearly mentions that Hindu artifacts were found. But then one of the archaeologists, K.K. Muhammad, when you read the report, you don't see much description. So K.K. Muhammad, he also got a Padma Shri recently. He wrote a memoir in which he described what really happened. He said, we got a call from Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister's office, saying that this finding needs to be suppressed and no further excavations will be conducted at that spot. So K.K. Muhammad he spoke up, and the consequences on his career were very obvious. He applied at the Aligarh Muslim University, and in Irfan Habib totally stalled his career. So all this is now published record. Dr. Brajvasi Lal, who was the ASI director, was actually cited by the Marxist and Islamist historians saying, look, he never mentioned any temple. So you have to trust the archaeologists, and B.B. Lal contradicted them right away. So instantly, from being a secular archaeologist, the very next day he was branded as a saffron archaeologist. Dr. B.B. Lal will be 100 years old next year, and you might not know he lives in LA with his 2 sons there. So I've had the pleasure of talking to him. So before demolition of Babri Mosque, there were periods where people were allowed into worship. Everybody knew that the mosque has 14 pillars, and the local Hindus believed that these black pillars were made from kasauti and a stone. And the traditional belief recorded by even the European travelers earlier was Hindus believed that these pillars were actually brought from Sri Lanka by Hanuman himself. Kasauti, as you know, is I think what you call the touchstone in English. It's used for testing the purity of gold. You rub the gold ornament and see, but in reality these are black schist pillars. But they have very distinctive features of Hindu architecture. The amlak, they have the Apsara Shalabjanika. So there's a pillar which has a lot of these human figures along its entire length, and each and every one of them has been defaced because of Islamic belief in iconoclasm. So here are some other pictures of the pillars, and the red marks are very typical. It's not just unique to the Babri Masjid, but wherever in India there are mosques demolished, constructed after demolishing temples, there are a lot of times there are spots where Hindus continue to return and they offer their worship by applying sindoor. So if you go to the Kashi Vishwanath temple, there's the Gyanvapi mosque, the old mosque, and every year there's actually a celebration called Shringar Gauri, where people throw vermilion and flowers, and so that wall has the red color. If you go to Srinagar, there's a, Khankai Mola or something, and there the Hindu Kashmiris would go down to the banks of Jhelum and put vermilion marks on the rear foundation. So that was our way of continuing to offer worship and preserving our memory. So again, some pictures of. Now this is a Bakar Pranala which was found in the wall of the mosque. A Pranala is used for ceremonial offering of water, shivling and murtis. So it's shaped like a crocodile. I tend to say alligator because in the US we have alligators. Right? So after the mosque was demolished, they found 300 artifacts underneath and from the walls. And the most interesting artifact was actually a very telltale inscription, and it talked about a mandir of Vishnu Hari who had vanquished the 10-headed, obviously Ravan, and who had also, and there'll be more details later, and who had killed Bali. Obviously our secular historians alleged that the inscription is faked. So there were over 100 epigraphists who can determine whether an artifact is fake or genuine. And 100 of them said no, it is genuine. Not a single one of them said that it's faked. It was in their Nandi Nagari script in Chast Sanskrit according to the norms of the prevailing times when it was written. Then they alleged that this was actually not discovered from the walls of the Babri Masjid. It was stolen from the Lucknow Museum. So the Lucknow Museum director, and remember seeing that TV appearance, and he said, the inscription they're talking about is always here, it never left, and it is from another mosque in Ayodhya which was also built over a demolished temple. So this is where, so they termed, all of them, they termed whatever artifacts were found during demolition as Kar Sevak archaeology, whatever that mean. But here is a picture of the inscription. There are the translation of these Sanskrit shlokas have been published in many books, and later on I can show them to you. But essentially it says Ayan Chandra got it to celebrate the temple by Ayusha Chandra, and both of them were regional leaders of the Gahadwala dynasty ruler Govinda Chandra. He is the same ruler who constructed many other temples in Ayodhya. And so it said the sky high temple was constructed for Vishnu Hari, and similar inscriptions have actually been found from other mosques which were built over demolished temple. So, it's a genuine inscription. It's now preserved at the a museum in Ayodhya. So when the court went, when the cases, further progressed, the Allahabad High Court ordered that, we don't want to dig up the space, so let's do a non-invasive analysis of the site. So they ordered a company named Tojo Vikas, based out of New Delhi, but they have Canadian collaboration, to do a ground penetrating radar survey. So this is the first page of the report. And so the Marxist historian said, well, this company is incompetent. Well, duh, this company had done the survey which led to the construction of Delhi Metro. So if they can do that, they could very well do this. But the survey findings are very clear that their radar penetration survey says that there are anomalies underground which indicate that there is demolished debris, there are walls, pillars, there's slab flooring, not just underneath the Babri Mosque, but in a wide area surrounding it. So now the court, so the historians said, we don't want to go any further, let's not dig this place. This is just a pretext to justify demolition of Babri Masjid. But the court didn't listen to them, and I will show you the copy of the cover. I have this whole report with me digitally. So the court made sure that of the 140 or 50 laborers, every third person was a Muslim. The report was authored by 20 archaeologists, of which 4 are Muslims, something which they never want to say. Whenever they say saffron archaeology, they will never mention this fact because it undercuts that. The entire operation is videotaped. Every time an object was found, it was bagged, registered, and representatives both the Janma Bhoomi Mukti Nyas and the Babri Masjid Action Committee were required to sign and acknowledge that this artifact has been found. So what they found was that earlier Bibi Lal and his team had found evidence of human inhabitation of Ayodhya only till 650 AD. But even with this limited 2-month or I don't know, few weeks archaeology, all of a sudden the antiquity of the site went to 1300 BC. So, I mean, that shows, and what they found was that underneath the mosque was not just a secular structure like a cow shed or a home, but it was of a religious nature, very important, and it was supported by numerous pillars, and some of the features showed characteristics of temple architecture. So this is a bird's eye view of what was done. So there were all these 4x4 trenches dug. So this is the spot where the central dome stood. So the Babri Masjid just covered this area. The court ordered digging all around it. So they found very interesting things here. They found a staircase leading underground close to the Ram Chabutra, and it led to what in Hindu temples we call a Pushkarani, which is, especially in South Indian temples, there's this tank. They found, so we'll see pictures of that. They found another Devanagari inscription. They found pillar bases. So this is just a picture of a small section of how they dug their trenches, and layer by layer they scooped out. I thought I'll show the page of the authors of this report. There are 20 distinct names and 4 are Muslims. And none of these Muslim authors has gone back on what is published in the report. They've all stood by the conclusions of this report. And the conclusion, a hypothesized model, is that there was a massive temple complex which was way beyond where the Babri Masjid stood. They in those trenches they could find around 50 pillar bases. The temple complex was 50 meters in the north-south direction minimum, and it was 30 meters minimum in the east-west direction. So they also find, like in every major temple there are side shrines. They found remnants of that. So they found a circular shrine which they concluded was a shrine to Bhagwan Shankar. So again the objection was, well, this was not a Rama temple, this was a Shaivite shrine. Well, even in our temple we worship all the Devi Devtas. You go to any major temple, you don't just worship the major deity, there are side shrines to other deities too. This circular shrine dated to just the post-Gupta or the Rajput period. This is a picture of the stairs going to the Pushkarani close to the Ram Chabutra. So this was the conclusion that the report drew, that the site went all the way back to 2nd millennium BC, which is like really ancient. compared to other shrines. It was continuously inhabited during the Shunga dynasty, the Kushan dynasty, Gupta dynasty, and then there was this post-Gupta, and that was a massive complex. The first temple was destroyed very soon. Then it was rebuilt by Govind Chandra's proteges, as we saw later. And very interestingly, when you construct a structure, you first lay out the foundations, but the Babri Masjid did not have any foundations. It was literally like constructing a home in Florida. You put a concrete slab and you build above it. So the Babri Masjid walls actually stood right above the walls of the ancient temple. The pillars, the 14 pillars, are right where they originally were in the temple. So it was obviously built on a pre-existing structure after destroying the same. Looks like some of the... Now the thing to keep in mind here is that what happened to the Ram Janma Bhoomi temple is not unique. It has happened everywhere from Morocco to Indonesia. It's not just the Hindus who have suffered this. If you go all over the world, the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus is over John the Baptist Church. Alaska is still in use. Sometimes they used to call Ram Janma Bhoomi as the Alaska of Hinduism. The Mazar-e-Sharif in Balkh was where Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, was buried. And it's actually the Mazar-e-Sharif is the national emblem of Afghanistan. It was constructed over a demolished Buddhist vihara, which was called the Buddhist monks, they were called the Burmaks, and they are mentioned in Arab literature. One of the oldest mosques in Iran is on a fire temple. And even in Ayodhya, it's not the only temple that was destroyed and replaced by a mosque. And the other thing is that Babur didn't just destroy this temple or cause the destruction of this temple. There are at least 2 or 3 more Babri masjids in India. One of them is in Panipat, close to Delhi, where the 3 battles of Panipat were fought. The other one is in Sambhal in western UP. So, New Agers, there's a publication company called the Shambhal Publishing Group, which publishes a lot of Buddhist So that word Shambhal comes from the place Sambhal, which is in Uttar Pradesh, because Hindus believe that that is where Kalki Avatar will appear in the future. And there was a shrine to Kalki Bhagwan, which was demolished to construct a mosque. I should have probably added a picture of that, but that mosque is still there, and it's also attributed, it's also called Babri Masjid. So in the Indian subcontinent, there are literally thousands of temples, viharas, which were demolished, and the people have made lists of them based on historical records. This is a beautiful book, The Hindu Masjids. Actually, the person has gone from mosque to mosque and taken hundreds of pictures showing how mosques have incorporated demolished temples. Many archaeologists have studied all these things about the Ram Janma Bhoomi specifically. There are pictures. The thing is that here again there are 2 other prominent temples where mosques were constructed. So we were talking about the Kashi Vishwanath temple. So this is the back portion of the ancient temple which was left intact to kind of insult and slight Hindus, that every time Hindus would come, they would see that their temple was incorporated to the mosque. Then we have the Krishna Janam Sthan, and when again digging was done at the back side of the mosque, they actually found murtis going back to around the Kushan era, 150 AD or something, and then the digging was stopped. But to slight Hindus, that Krishna Bhakts and Vaishnavas are vegetarians, Aurangzeb deliberately demolished the Krishna Janam Sthan and constructed an Eidgah over it. Eidgah is a place where on Eidul Zuha you slaughter animals. So right now that activity is not allowed. Raja Patnimal of the Maratha chief had purchased this land. So technically that land still belongs to the descendants of Raja Patnimal, but an Eidgah stands over it. So this was my brief talk. Like I said, if I had digressed into politics and media, then this discussion will never finish. But I think I'm really grateful to the numerous Hindus who lived their whole lives. I personally had never imagined that this day would come when we would see a temple come up at Ram Janma Bhoomi. My wife grew up close to Ayodhya, and every day from her school bus she saw Babri Masjid. And Interestingly, the court judgment came on her birthday last year. And there are numerous scholars who've been writing, their careers have been destroyed and ruined because they spoke the truth. And I also had the privilege of actually talking to some of these scholars myself. B.R. Grover, I recall, I spoke to him just a few days before he had a heart attack. I was not the cause of it. And he was a very humble man, and he went over a few things with me. And Dr. S.P. Gupta, again, I saw him when he was already in the ICU, but I happened to be in Delhi and I paid a visit. And even when in the ICU, he was so devoted to scholarly pursuits, he had asked me to get him some publications from the US. And I didn't take him to the ICU, but he said, "Did you bring those papers for me?" But that's the commitment these scholars have. So that ends my talk. Any question? So this is just a sample of the pictures of the artifacts, and there's a lot of stuff. So it's ironical that something with so much clear-cut evidence had to drag on for such a long time. But then people believe that the sun goes around the earth for centuries. What to do?
Vishal, where all have you traveled in Asia? Like, have you been to Cambodia, for instance?
No, I haven't. I've been to Bali, I've been to Thailand.
To me, it was very saddening. Like when you go to these places, so there are all these temples, like including Angkor Wat. Now, I'm not as good at remembering years as you are, but these temples are built thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And you go from seeing this beautiful architecture, and then you come out to the city, and all you see are massage parlors and beer bars.
Oh wow.
So you are saddened by seeing that these people that are living there, their ancestors were building such great architecture, and now they have been diminished to doing such things, right? So it's really it is sad.
Well, it only shows that you really have to make an attempt to preserve our heritage. First, you need to value it, and then secondly, heritage doesn't pass on from generation to generation if you don't do anything about it. So here I'm literally preaching to the choir, because a lot of you are bringing your children week after weekend and also volunteering to teach them about our heritage, but the majority don't care, and what's true in those countries is also actually true in India now. A lot of people are so divorced from our rich heritage, and if we value it, it is our duty to go against the tide and treat it. I think we should draw inspiration from all these scholars I have listed. Their careers were stalled, they were blacklisted, they were called saffron this and saffron that, but they've persisted, and the antagonizing other side didn't even want any digging, because literally the skeletons would be out of the cupboard, and that's what happened. What was very obvious, now there is material proof for that. So yeah.
So the Allahabad High Court judgment came in 1989, right?
It came in 2010, September. The digging was done, the Tojo Vikas survey was ordered in late 2002, their report came in February 2003, and then the ASI excavations were done in the early part of 2003. And despite all that, because of the excruciatingly detailed arguments, counter-arguments, the Allahabad High Court passed its judgment in 2010. Justice Mishra, Justice Agrawal, and there was a Muslim judge, and they said the site should be partitioned in 3 parts. 1/3 goes to a Muslim party, and the other 2 parts go to 2 Hindu organizations. And then appeals are filed in the Supreme Court, and that judgment came out on 9th November last year, which said the whole 2.7 acres of the land should be given to Hindus, and Muslims should be given an alternate piece of land.
Okay, my question is different. My question is around the communist role in this, because there are 2 parties, the Hindus who claim it's Ram Janma Bhoomi and the Muslims claim it's Babri Masjid. There was a 3rd party who played a significant role, which is communists, who took the side of the Muslims.
Yes.
So tell us more about how communists were, their nexus with the fundamentalists.
So, very interestingly, before the locks were opened and even after the locks were opened, the priest of the Babri, the Hindu priest of the Babri Masjid, Janma Bhoomi, himself was a communist, Mahant Lal Das. And he played a double-faced role. Lal Das, red, communist color. And he was also involved in local, Gunda groups, and eventually he was shot dead a few years later. So the communist historians like Romila Thapar, Arthur Ali, Irfan Habib, R.S. Sharma, D.N. Jha, Suraj Bhan, they all appeared as witnesses in favor of the All India Babri Masjid Action Committee. And they're all listed in that judgment if you read, I think it's a 7,000 page. When the court, Allahabad High Court, actually asked these people to come and demonstrate how they were specialists in that area, and they also called other people like Supriya Verma. There's a D. Mandal, Sushil Shrivastava, who wrote supposedly scholarly books saying there was no temple. It actually turned out that these people were total frauds. It's right there in the report where the judge was very frustrated with them. Most of them had never visited Ayodhya. This Sushil Shrivastava, who was passing judgments on the date of the inscription on the mosque, it was found he cannot read Urdu or Farsi, the script he had based on secondary thing, but he wrote a book. And these people, a lot of them are rehabilitated in American campuses, including him right now. Supriya Verma said that she's not even a specialist on that period or in archaeology. So the real scholars were promptly branded as saffronists, including Bibi Lal. One day he was a progressive archaeologist, and the very next day after he gave the interview to BBC, saying that he believes there was a temple, he was saffronized. So the communists have played a very dirty role. They continue to play even after the Supreme Court judgment on 9th of November. Romila Thapar wrote an op-ed in the Hindu newspaper or Frontline saying that this is a triumph of faith over science and all. They will never give up. The extent to which they were shameless and belligerent is, I cannot even imagine how somebody can be so shameless. And they will continue to do that. If it's today, it's Babri Mosque. There are even theories about the Kashi Vishwanath temple, which they've been propagating, that it was an act of great mercy on the part of Aurangzeb to destroy that temple. There's this Aryan invasion theory on which they continue to spread their lies, and I think their agendas are driven quite politically. And the interesting thing is that these Marxist historians or archaeologists like Suraj Bhan, he's from Kurukshetra University. If you read his older publications in 1970s, he clearly talks about the Saraswati River and the Harappan sites in it. But Hindus really got very happy about it. So now suddenly he changed his track. Now all of a sudden the Saraswati River is a myth in his writings. He has never explained why he changed his decision. But depending on which way the political winds are blowing, same is the case with Irfan Habib. If you look at his older writings, he takes the identification of Ghaggar Hakra with Saraswati for granted. But if you see his recent publications, just because he feels that Saraswati River is somehow tied to the Hindutva agenda, he's suddenly taken the opposite stance. So I think we need to call out these people that they're not really scholars, they're more politicians and demagogues. And you really have to read the literature from beginning to modern times to see how unscrupulous they are. I mean, recently the governor of Kerala went for a convocation, and Irfan Habib even went up to the stage and tried to forcibly disrupt the meeting. So, I mean, what kind of a scholar he is? A scholar hooligan. So I think we need to call them out and not be scared of them. I don't know if I've answered your questions.
Pretty much, yeah. Thank you very much.
I have a general question about the care that is received by Hindu temples and whether they sometimes get abandoned and ultimately fall apart. And the reason I ask the question is that we spent the year 1965-66 in Tirupati, and the university there had a program to go around the countryside and collect pillars that were just lying in the fields, bring them to the campus and restore them and make a display. And we also, from time to time, saw villages in which shaped stones that seemed to have been part of a temple previously were simply incorporated in village houses as construction material. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering what you can tell us about the possibility that from time to time a temple simply gets abandoned and nobody takes care, falls apart, and then components can be reused.
There is actually a non-governmental organization, and they are specifically based in southern Indian states, Kerala, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and they gather volunteers to clear out, all the shrubs and filth that is collected around these abandoned temples, and they are trying to revive worship in many of these temples. So I do get updates from them. It's really heartening. I think they have revived more than 100 temples. Specifically in Kerala, during the invasion of Tipu Sultan in 1700s, a lot of temples and churches were destroyed. And so worship has not been conducted there for over 2 centuries now. And so they've managed to revive, with the help of local Hindu communities, many of those things. But with such a vast heritage that the Indian subcontinent has, it really has to be a people's movement. There's only as much as these organizations can do. There are some parts of India which have been very successful. In the state of Haryana specifically, there is actually a very ground level awareness of the Harappan sites which litter the whole state. And so even farmers, if they're trying to crop a new area, they do engage scholars from the MD University, Rohtak, or the Kurukshetra University. So in that part, it's kind of become a mass movement, but that awareness needs to really spread. In my own brother's home, he has used door salvage from olden homes in coastal Karnataka. And he did that out of environmental concern. He didn't want to chop more trees, but it would have been really interesting to make some notations on how old these doors were.
But the main question for me was, or one question was, how did the disintegration of the temples come about? Was it always because they were destroyed partially or defiled by Muslim invaders? Or are there also cases where, I don't know, the power structure in the state changed and a village that had been important was no longer important and the temple was simply abandoned? It
was a combination of reasons, like you said. If you go to the Khajuraho temple complex, those regions were seats of power, but the power moved to other areas, and these temples did not attract attention for iconoclastic rulers, invaders. So those kind of just withered away till they were refurbished in recent times. But as I think if you were to make a generalization, if you travel from Kabul all the way to Dhaka in Bangladesh, ancient temple complexes are more of an exception than a norm. In cities of ancient standing like Mathura, Prayag, Raj, called Allahabad, Varanasi, there are no ancient Hindu shrines that exist today. And the reason is that entire cities were destroyed. There are descriptions that even the foundations were dug up, fire was set with using naphtha. There were cannons were fired on the Krishna Janamsthan temple. So there was very thorough. Now we might say, oh, this is too much of an exaggeration, but things like these have happened in our own lifetime. In the Kashmir Valley, if you read books from 70s and 80s showing Hindu temples, and now if you read the recent books, they have recorded that a lot of these places were dug up, including their foundations were dug up, so that there is no evidence left that there was ever a Hindu institution on this site. So it's not something which has happened in the past, it's something which is happening right in front of our eyes. But yes, sometimes, power structures change, people's priorities change, and so older structures wither away. That's true.
Thank you.
In your presentation, you said that prior to 1986, there was a chance for Hindus to go inside the Babri Masjid also.
For quite some time, and then there was, for just a couple of years, and then the local magistrate, Mr. Nair, put the locks and only Mahant Lal Das, the communist priest, and a few people were allowed in. So the picture I showed was from that rare short period, but people could worship from outside the gates. So, because I personally know many people who've done that.
But do you remember the year when that photo picture was?
I would assume it's before 1951 because the Murti of Ram Lala was placed there in 1949, I believe. And then soon thereafter the magistrate got it locked. And then in 86 when the locks were opened, I remember there was tension in Old Delhi area and a curfew was declared. Because my school bus used to pass in front of Janma Masjid every day, so I know that. We had to take a detour.
Was it puja and everything also performed during that?
Pujas were performed. In fact, they were performed even before the murtis were placed. Like the Nihangs performed puja and did havans. And so that was now, it's a digression, but the court awarded the shrine to Hindus because because they said the Muslims have not been able to demonstrate that despite the presence of a mosque, they had continuous occupation of the location, whereas Hindus have demonstrated through all these records that despite the destruction of their temple, they never really let go that site from, and they continued to come back and keep performing pujas. All those European records and all, if you align them all chronologically, then it shows that Hindus kept going back and perform their ceremonies. And so that was a major basis on which the court awarded the site. Otherwise, if you lose, if somebody encroaches on your place, then after 50 years, you cannot just go back and claim it. But the Muslims are not able to demonstrate that they have continuously performed namaz on that site. Yeah.
Pardon me, talking back short. How secular is India's constitution? What does India's constitution say?
So our preamble has the word secular, which was added in the late 1970s when Indira Gandhi declared national emergency and dismissed the parliament so she could push through amendments. India is secular in the sense that it does not favor one religion over the other, but unfortunately in our constitution there are many provisions inbuilt which discriminate against the majority. One of them is the educational institutions run by minorities can get funding from the government, but institutions run by Hindus cannot get that funding and they cannot teach classes of any religion. A few years back we had the RTE Act, the Right to Education, which said that all institutions must take, I think, 25% of the students from underprivileged communities. The minority institutions were exempted from that provision. So what's happening now is that Hindu institutions have to forcibly take 25% of the student population from the poor communities and then charge the other 75% extra money, which makes them economically less competitive than the minority-run institutions. Now, I myself went to a Catholic school for 13 years and a Protestant college, St. Stephen's College, and my annual fee in St. Stephen's in 1989-90 was like 500 rupees. All the remaining money, which was not even enough to do the paperwork, all the remaining money was coming from the government of India. Just across the street was a Hindu college, which was Hindu only in name. So whereas we had mandatory Bible reading in the college assembly for first year students like me every day, there was no teaching of Hindu traditions in the Hindu college just across the road. So there is some institutionalized discrimination against Hindus, and I think that's something, I'm not saying that the rights of the minority institutions should be taken away, but I think government should make the majority-run institutions also eligible for the same benefits for the sake of equality.
I would like to have your opinion from a civilization perspective. not a religious perspective. It has two prongs. The question is, what is your opinion on the necessity of bringing down the structure through fair or unfair means? What does it mean to the revival of or what does it mean to the Hindu civilization? The second is, we know what the Marxist historians did. So what was their motivation? So these two, and how do you relate these two to the revival or flourishing of our Hindu civilization?
You know, it's my personal opinion that if the mosque hadn't been demolished, the Hindus didn't have a case. Unfortunately, in this world, we reward violence and aggressive behavior. Nobody would dare to repeat a Charlie Hebdo cartoon thing because they know their throats will be slit and bombs will be thrown. Whereas Hindus and Buddhists, you know, we tolerate a lot of insults and demeaning behavior towards our traditions, and so we are taken for a ride. And it's really unfortunate. And who's enabling them? A lot of the so-called leftists and Marxists are enablers, and they work in tandem everywhere in the world. Even the Iranian revolution was greatly supported by the leftists. And when Khomeini and his team came to power, the first thing they did was jail all the communists and leftists, and where they rotted. Like Ali Dashti was an Iranian scholar who was a very leftist and secular humanist. He supported the Iranian revolution, and then when they came to power in '79 or something, he was jailed and he rotted and died there. But pretty much in Islamic countries, typically the leftist movements will not be given a foothold. Elsewhere, where non-Islamic cultures are predominant, their tendency is to create anarchy in the society, so they always go against the dominant culture, and so they easily find allies with some minority communities who are willing to collaborate. This is a very standard pattern all over the world. You go to Europe, even if you see in the United States.
Okay.
So it's a marriage of convenience, and eventually when they do get married, there will be a prompt divorce. Yeah.
Vishal, much more simple question. All the excavations that came out, are they for display or public viewing?
So there is a museum where everything that was unearthed during the demolition is preserved. Very interestingly, even though BJP never came to power for over 2 decades, none of the governments had dared to touch that museum. And then all the other artifacts which came out in 2003 are also being preserved. I hope that now, by next weekend, the government of India is supposed to announce the committee for reconstruction, because the 90-day period will be over. My understanding is that the committee is already formed, they've just not made the announcement. So the hope is that when the temple is reconstructed and they thoroughly excavate the land, whatever comes up will be really displayed in an academic, scholarly manner. But I think there is going to be a master plan for that whole area, because the current Chief Minister of the state really wants to develop Ayodhya as a very prime pilgrimage center for the Hindu community. I can only speak to myself. Whenever the temple comes off, and if they're accepting foreign donations and foreign labor, I'd be really glad to take the flight, go there, perform service and donate money. And I hope that there will be a day when the Krishna Janamsthan and the Kashi Vishwanath temples are also reclaimed. There are many traditions in Hinduism which have passed away with the destruction of this temple. For example, when we go to Gaya, Tirth in Bihar, there is a Pitru Shraddh which is performed there. Now, some people might say, oh, this is very patriarchal. Well, there was a Matru Shraddh also performed on the other side of India in the Siddhpur area in Gujarat. There was a Rudra Mahalaya temple built by the Solanki dynasty. Well, that temple was destroyed and replaced with a mosque, and that tradition died out because of that. So I think our civilization still has a strong memory and also the willingness to fight back. Unfortunately, we've lost many times because of divisions within our own society, because of forgetfulness, and because of our tendency to tolerate the intolerant. So
Vishal, on that note, how much do we know about the Taj Mahal? I mean, there are a lot of temples which are destroyed and mosques built, but there are rumblings about Taj Mahal as well.
I personally am not convinced that there was a Hindu structure underneath the Taj Mahal. I mean, I am not a fan of pea and oak. It's such a fantastic, ridiculous listing of facts he's made. The Taj Mahal can remain there. I mean, what's the problem? The land might have been owned by the Amir Raja and might have been taken as a gift by Shah Jahan, but that particular site has no particular sanctity in the Hindu religion. Shah Jahan might have accepted it as a gift, just like in Hyderabad. I've heard if you go to the Falaknuma Palace, it was actually constructed by a diwan of the Nizam, and he invited the Nizam for the inauguration ceremony. It's just probably a folk tale, but so the Nizam went there for inauguration. He was so charmed by the palace, he's like, this is mine. And he said, I'm happy to announce that my diwan has just gifted this palace to me. So, so maybe that's how Shah Jahan got a hold of that patch of land, but it doesn't hold any specific sanctity in the Hindu faith. And we really cannot turn back history all the time, but I think it's fair to ask for the few places which hold continuous and eternal importance to our civilization. Yeah.
So there is a movement going on in India right now to get the temples out of government's control. So what's your opinion about it?
They should be out of the government's control. It's a literal looting of the donations, or innocent, ordinary pilgrims like us. We, out of our faith and reverence, we put in money into the hundis, and then you have this whole bureaucracy and hierarchy managed by the state. The HRCE boards, or whatever they're called in the southern states, and now they're expanding all over India. And so technically the governments take the collections as a loan on paper, which are used for secular projects, but their loan is never returned. The land is leased to the government, and the government actually sells off that land. So on paper it's a loan to the government, but it's never returned. So it's literally a state-sponsored looting of temples. In the state of Karnataka, for example, Karnataka, I'm told the temples have an income of over 200 crore rupees every year, and only 50 crores is spent back on the temples, which is less than the Hajj subsidy that the government of Karnataka gave to the Muslim community without taking a dime from any Waqf board or any mosque. So the government only touches Hindu institutions. All the other institutions are self-managed.
That's Article 25, right?
Yeah, so exactly. So that needs to be modified, or it needs to go. So there is that a group of people who are fighting legal cases to get the temples out of government control. On theory, the Supreme Court of India has said, why should the government run the temples? The devotees should be running their own temples. But again, our courts act at a snail's pace. This lawsuit has been dragging on for 50, 60 years. And if the ecosystem had not been favorable, maybe even this judgment would not have come out.
Can I add one thing to that? Especially in Tamil Nadu, the ASI, in conjunction with the government, they pull down the temples. They do, in the name of reconstruction, they really destroy the ancient and medieval temples. And to his point, they just leave you can see the fillers just lying around all over the ground, and they use plaster of Paris, and really they could do better. But in conjunction with both the government and the ASI, they are doing a very bad job, at least in Tamil Nadu.
Yeah.
They're bringing down all old and big temples down.
Yeah. I've actually read of, I don't know if it was Tirupati or another temple in Tamil Nadu where a pillared hall, which was 1,000 years old from the Chola times, in the name of expansion, that was demolished by the government orders, and that's just not the right thing to do.
Vishal,
Yeah.
you had mentioned that, and we are all waiting, we always feel that Ayodhya to jaki hai, Kashi Mathura abhi baki hai. But I am not aware of the law correctly, but I was told by somebody that 1947 mein jo whatever was disputed, only those will be resolved, others will not be even touched. So Mathura and Kashi might not even have a battle to fight.
So the law says that the status of all disputed sites will stay exactly the same as it was on 15th of August 1947, with the exception of the Ram Janam Sthan temple. So the question was, what really was the status of those sites? There is actually a lawsuit which is also proceeding at a snail's pace related to the Kashi Vishwanath temple. And that lawsuit says that on the 15th of August 1947, the Kashi Vishwanath, the Gyanvapi mosque, was in Hindu possession. And it was only a couple of years or further later that the Muslims further gained control over the site. So let's see. But laws can change.
There is hope then. So the map that was torn by Rajiv Dhawanji in the court, you still
Well, you know, that was a modern map which referenced these different publications. And there is another interesting book. First he was shown this book and then a map was produced. I was fumbling through the pages to see the map is in there, but that map used the information in this and other books to, you know, give a map of the Janma Bhoomi, and he in frustration tore it off. So.
Did British do anything to the Ayodhya site?
So what I have gathered actually from this book was that the Awadh Nawabs allowed both the Hindus and Muslims to perform worship inside the mosque, and of course there were frequent disputes, and then the British constructed a railing saying that only Muslims can go inside the mosque and Hindus can only worship outside the Ram Chabutra. So whatever their intentions were, you know, but that kind of excluded Hindus from the real area where we worshipped. And so there are, you know, the gazetteers and the records, and they just try to somehow keep peace by keeping the two communities separate. In 1930s, there was a massive riot and the entire Muslim community of Ayodhya fled, and the mosque itself was in a very bad, dilapidated situation. It was then repaired. After that, if you see really old pictures of Babri Masjid, it's totally whitewashed from outside. Not the brown color, but it's a whitewashed mosque. Even in Ayodhya itself, there are about 50 mosques, but the population is only 6% Muslim. They cannot even maintain the mosques they have right now. But you know, the Babri Masjid became like a prestige issue for the community in India and outside India.
Can I ask one more question? Can this event be seen as a defeat of the mischievous Marxist scholars? And would it help the real secular and Hindu scholars to come out and be more out in the open?
I do see a lot of people becoming more vocal about the correct versions of history. I have grown up, pardon?
You said you don't?
I do see.
Oh, okay.
So that's a very heartening sign. And I see the country which has its national motto as Satyamev Jayate should truly act according to the motto that if truth alone triumphs, then why should one resort to half-truths and lies? I have grown up reading NCERT textbooks all along, and you know, Aurangzeb was such a pious scholar who earned his living by, you know, sewing those skull caps and copying the Quran. That's how he was projected in our textbooks, as if he was some kind of a Mahatma or Sant. But in our living tradition in Delhi, we hear so many stories that once the musicians took a procession outside his court, and the king asked whose funeral procession that is, and the musician said, Badshah, this is the funeral procession of music in your rule. And the ruler said, bury him so deep that he doesn't ever come out. So that's how orthodox he was. There are mosques in Delhi. There's a Nadiri Masjid, and you know, if you go there, anybody will tell you that Nadir Shah went to that Gumbad and said there should be a Katleam, massacre of Delhi residents. This is all living history, memory, you know, and that has been suppressed in the hope that after a few generations people will not remember. And to some extent they have succeeded, but there is a sufficient critical mass of people who do remember our oral traditions and still have the civilizational memory.
Thank you.
Thank you.